My name is Raul Fernandez, and I am the director of something called the UC Cuba Academic Initiative, which is a consortium of professors and PhD students across all 9 campuses. And we are involved in this program. I think both Lisa Garcia Bedoya this morning and Laura Enriquez are two of our active UC Cuba people here in Berkeley. We have 4 members of this panel. I'm going to introduce them very briefly so we can move on. Darius Anderson is the founder and CEO of Platinum Advisors. You can actually read more extensively in your booklet details about him. Professor Carl Voigt comes to us from the USC, from the University of Southern California, and I'm going to let him say exactly who he is. Bill Martinez is well known to a lot of us. He's an immigration attorney and very importantly, a Cuban music promoter in the San Francisco Bay Area. And Michael Zucato is president of a very important company, Cuba Travel Services, because it's the only one that gives us direct flights from California to Havana. So I encourage all of you to sponsor and take flights with Cuba Travel Services. So we will start with, Darius Anderson has not arrived yet, I don't believe. So we will begin with Bill Martinez, and we'll try and limit each presentation to about 10 minutes.
Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure to be here. I got into doing this U.S.-Cuba cultural work in '93 when I was working with an organization called the Encuentro del Canto Popular. It was a festival we created in the Mission District in San Francisco to promote music that spoke about social change, peace and love, and all that stuff. In '93, I got a call from the State Department. We were trying for the first time to bring a Cuban group to the U.S. or to this festival, the group Mezcla. A day before the group was supposed to leave, no one could find the file. They were supposed to be at the Smithsonian and then Stanford and other organizations and really prestigious venues. Everything looked great. We were told all along, no problem, everything's fine, everything's great. So I'm at my real job at the Bar Association, and I finally got a call from the State Department, from Dennis Hayes at the State Department. And he goes, yeah, I got your file right here. I got your file. And I said, great, so are they going to be approved? Are they going to come to the U.S. now? Because we're all ready to go. He says, they're not going anywhere. I said, well, what do you mean? He explained, they're not going to make it. And I said, well, can you give me something in writing that I can give to the various presenters across the country about this? And he said in this really ugly way, I don't have to, you don't need anything. They're Cubans, and that's all you need to know. And he hung up on me. This then became my mission. So we filed a federal lawsuit, and the lawsuit went on for 2 years or so, and Wayne Smith was one of our witnesses, and we did a great job, I thought, fighting this case to make sure that Cubans could perform in the United States. And unfortunately, we lost. The trial was sort of a trip. The guy was like Columbo, walked in there for the government, and he goes, Your Honor, we could do anything we want, and, you can't touch us. We could do things that are, unconstitutional maybe, or like discriminatory. It doesn't make a difference. You can't touch us. Judge turned red in the face, and we looked at each other, and unfortunately, we lost because I guess they could get away with it. They have unfettered executive discretion to make those calls. The groups we didn't succeed then, but fortunately, the mood of during the Clinton administration allowed us to finally sort of get it, and we were allowed to bring Cuban artists in increments. We got first, I think it was Chucho Valdez, the Iraquere Four. We got 4 members of Iraquere to play here in the Bay Area and elsewhere. We then got Changuito, the timbalero, with los Ban Ban. Little by little, we opened the door so our artists could come in. When we finally got all the Ban Ban in around 96, 95, thereabouts, we knew that we really could relatively have relative confidence that these events could happen. We could pull these things off. And so we were able, in the 90s, during the Clinton administration, we were able to bring in many, many groups. And it led to, you know, Ray Cooter's bringing the Buena Vista Social Club to fruition sort of by happenstance that he was there actually for another project. The visas were denied for the African artists that time. The Malian artists weren't able to make it to Cuba, but while he was there, he decided to hook up with these Afro-Cuban artists that were formed, that really the genesis of the Afro-Cuban All-Stars. Juan de Marcos got together with Rai, and they put together Buena Vista Social Club. They made it to Carnegie Hall, and actually that was sort of the monumental, historical moment then. We really knew we arrived. And when I think about what we then, during the Bush administration, all that ended, and it was like starting from scratch. We didn't get anybody in, and I keep thinking about the value of the work that we do, and think of the relationships that were created when Buena Vista Social Club came over here. Think of the connections that our communities made every time we were able to bring Cuban artists to the U.S. And I kept thinking in the back of my mind, well, what's wrong with having these? What's wrong with these exchanges? Culture is communication. And what happens when you block cultural exchanges? What happens when you block communication? You get more rumors, you get more myth, you get more lies. And it gets us nowhere. And we should be about much more, higher values. This is what, I'm preaching to the choir, I know when I say it, but when I was doing some of our research for preparing our lawsuit and all that, I came to the roots of some of this, the mindset behind some of these restrictions on visas and such. And when they created these operations, Operation Mongoose and all that, and when the Castro administration began, look at some of the words in Operation Mongoose about how they control things, the messaging. Activate key public leaders in Latin America, make them timely, strong statements about Castro communist threat to hemisphere and failures of the regime towards workers. Produce material for major psychological impact. And they get to talking about visas and licenses and ways for us to connect and how we're getting played. And that's how I look at a lot of what's going on is we get these operations, we get certain policies that we think are unchangeable, that is so ingrained in our culture. It doesn't have to be that way. We talked about hegemonic relationships. We talked about the arrogance of our policies, sort of controlling the shots. It goes back to sort of a mindset of the Monroe Doctrine and Manifest Destiny and all that. You really think about it, though, the big picture. We have to create new paradigms now, and culture can make it happen. We have now, I can say, with the current administration, since we experimented again as soon as Obama came into power, we were able to get Silvio Rodriguez in, and then we got all, the same sort of incremental developments happen. So I can tell you now, we have visas for the 75-member Symphonic Orchestra of Cuba that's going to be coming in to the country in a couple of weeks. Here in the Bay Area, you can see Septeto Nacional, Orquesta Aragon. We have a lot of interesting projects coming up, and I'm actually recommending to as many clients as I can, get your petitions in now, because if things don't turn out well in November, who knows how things are going to get reversed, and we could be back to square one and have to get to Cuba some other ways. And, that's for the Cuban visa artists to come here. We've also been bringing U.S. artists to Cuba. We were able to, even under the Bush administration, we were able to put together this concert with this group called Audio Slave, otherwise known as Rage Against the Machine. And the way we got that license, remarkably, under the Bush administration, was we sort of used their words about, the U.S. government's policy had been, do what you can to hasten the transition to democracy. Get to the youth and say, okay, well, the youth is going to listen to these guys because they're radical, wild, crazy guys. And so so we actually got it approved. And actually, the really crazy thing about that license is it actually authorized us to do a commercial CD and DVD package. It never happened before, and I don't think it's been licensed to do that since, but it's great that happened at that moment. And so, it's a two-way street, that we're looking for, where Cubans of all kinds can come here, and that U.S. artists and the rest of us can go to Cuba with some, like we would normalize relations. I'll stop there, and thank you.
Thank you. Professor Carl Voigt.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation to be here. I think, as we've seen all day, we're speaking to people that are truly convinced that there's an opportunity to engage with Cuba. And I think that I'm going to speak about university exchange programs and the things that we've been doing at the University of Southern California, but I think I'm going to give the message at the beginning and I'll give it to you at the end. Those of you, particularly in the room, who are involved in academic institutions or otherwise, organize the programs. Take as many of our young people, take as many of your graduate students, your undergraduate students to there, because the value of seeing for yourself. You can listen to what other people tell you and it becomes ideology, propaganda, but by taking young people, they can see through. I wish you could have sat with my undergrads in the U.S. intersection in Cuba, where they rolled out this rather slick young man from the State Department to issue what was the company line. And these young undergrads just had a field day, had him backing up. I mean, they listened for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and then just began a conversation. At the University of Southern California, we adopted a policy more than over a decade and a half ago. If you're going to teach people about the world around us, you got to get them on planes. And so our movement and our interest in going to Cuba was very much involved with that. You being able to see for yourself, experience, taste, smell, touch. And it comes from the sort of basic notion that to learn, you want to put your students in an environment where they don't understand the rules, have to really think, begin to really use their powers of observation and analyze. And Cuba provides an amazing opportunity for students of any discipline. I'm going to talk specifically about business schools, because to a large extent, business schools are the things that it's an economic embargo. It's a blockade against business people doing things. The University of Southern California, we've done 16 visits between 2001. Actually, Kirby's not here at the moment, but he was the enabler. I went to one of his U.S.-Cuba business summits back in 2000. We went across for a day. I talked to the Vice Minister of Education, said, would you invite us to come? She said, absolutely, and then from there we started to try to develop programs. We ran programs till 2007, when the Bush administration sent very, very strongly worded letters to all of the business schools in the U.S. that had been taking students to Cuba, various programs, and basically threatened. In our case, they said, we don't think that you've been doing it according to policy. You should stop. Other schools got much stronger letters saying, we believe that you have violated U.S. policy, and if you continue, we will take you to court. In our case, we believed that we were meeting not only the letter, but the spirit of the law, and we wanted to take on the U.S. government. Well, talk to universities' general counsels, and they go, let's not do that. So our programs, along with everybody else's, were discontinued in 2007. For those of you at universities, you know that one of the more positive things that the Obama administration has done has reformulated, promulgated the travel requirements or restrictions on universities, and basically opened it. It's made it easy. So if you're involved with the university, it's not hard. Okay? In the sense that if you have students that are in a class where they're getting academic credit, whether it's an independent study or whether it's a class where a trip that was related to it could enhance the class, you are allowed to travel. You may go down to Cuba yourself to set it up without any. You don't need a special license or anything. What's interesting and sad, before 2011. The real problems with going to Cuba was dealing with the U.S. and all the bureaucracy and getting the special licenses and making sure that you kept all your paperwork and all that kind of stuff. Now, from the point of view of universities, that's easy. The biggest problem that we have now is, as you all know, that whenever the U.S. changes its policies and says, the U.S. says, we're going to use people-to-people programs to destabilize and bring about regime change in Cuba, the Cubans go, now what does that mean? And so for us, organizing programs in Cuba have become very difficult. Trying to find the right organizations. Previously, we would organize our programs through the Ministry of Foreign Investment, which no longer exists, is now part of the Ministry of Trade. But we were, being business students, MBAs in particular, the then Deputy Minister, Ernesto Senti, saw the benefit of having prospective business people travel to Cuba. And whatever he did behind the scenes took control of these US programs to go to Cuba, away from the Ministry of Education to his ministry. We had problems. We tried to organize programs with the Ministry of Education, with the universities there, and what they want to do is they want to sit you in a classroom and lecture at you for a week, 2 weeks, however long you're there, 8 hours a day, which is not what we want. We're quite capable of doing those boring lectures here. Sorry to all my colleagues out there who don't do those things, but I put myself to sleep whenever I have to lecture too. So the point on this is that we wanted to get there and get out and see people and touch and feel and engage. To step back a little bit, it's a fantastic, fascinating learning laboratory. There's arguably nowhere else on earth. My dean, when we first asked to go, he said, yeah, with all due respect, quote, Cuba's not even a spit in the ocean when it comes to economic impact. We don't trade, and then I say, yeah, but Cuba's managed to bring the world to the brink on numerous occasions. And taking people to Cuba to get them to understand, it's one of the last planned economies, the transition. It's in a fabulous learning environment for students, for anybody, to say, how do you build an economy? One of the things that we've forgotten, and US economists made really, really bad mistakes when they tried to help the then Soviet Union make the transition, is that they forgot that you have to build the institutions. And for those who have traveled to Cuba, okay, you understand that Cuba lacks the basic institutions to support a modern economy. Just getting vegetables from the fields to from the field to the fork. The logistics, but more importantly, the credit systems, the information systems. And so from our perspective, as academics and as people who take students there, getting the Cubans, setting aside the politics, I was talking with one of my colleagues over here. In a way, business schools, and we like to have it both ways. We like to be agnostic. We like to say we're agnostic to the politics of the situation. How can we engage in building a viable economy that helps improve the prosperity, not only of the Cubans, but of us? One of my students, who was an MBA MD, did a project. And for those of you who know this about the biotech center there, they have a therapeutic that treats vascular degeneration and advanced diabetes, where and he did the estimate, being a business student, he figured that over a 5-year period, having access to that drug, the US would save $11 billion. Okay? That they have the drug, we don't have it. By using it here, our solution to the problem of advanced vascular degeneration is just chop off the leg, put the person in a wheelchair, and pay them public assistance to help them with their new life in a wheelchair. That's the kind of learning that we can get by going there, seeing what the Cubans have done. The link between business and politics becomes really live when you get there. And our students are smart enough. We would get briefings from MINREX, the Ministry of Foreign Relations, who would come in and they would talk about the five and all of the things on our side, and we'd ask questions. And for the first time, the students begin to get real information. To put our money where our mouth is, I have helped other business schools. I've taken just under 20 different business schools, including, and I made a list here somewhere, the East Coast schools, MIT, Dartmouth, New York University, Columbia, Wharton, Duke, SMU, UCLA, San Diego State, and other universities to go down there and meet and develop programs. The unfortunate thing right now is that the way that the Cubans are organizing things, and we have to crack this nut while we're sitting here, we're negotiating with what we think might be a new center at the University of Havana that might be able to organize programs for us that will get us to be able to see what we want to see and learn. From the point of view of the Cubans, they have been exceptionally open. Complete open dialogue. They never put a restriction on us to where we wanted to go, except obviously we didn't want to go to military facilities, but wherever we asked to go, whoever we asked to speak to, they were willing to facilitate the conversations, because their argument is that they can learn from the questions that US business students ask. all right? And we can learn at the same time. I think that those are sort of the basic comments that I want to make, other than to return to the opening point that I made in this conversation, is that it helps us and it helps them if we engage in these trips. And for those of you who are a little timid about doing it, we've organized, I think, 16 of them. It gets a little scary at the beginning, but it's easy to do. We've got the transportation over here.
Remind me to give me my card, right? Didn't know you did all this.
And so it should be done. So for those of you who are engaged in this kind of stuff, and for those of you who are also engaged in humanitarian type things, find a reason to go, okay? And I'll conclude with that comment.
You want me to start here? I will.
Please, Michael Zuccato.
Good afternoon. My name is Michael Zuccato of Cuba Travel Services. I had a kind of more of a formal PowerPoint to do, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to hit the highlights of our company, so we can focus more on kind of the roundtable discussion, I guess, of the group and having some interaction from the people here. Cuba Travel Services is a company that was incorporated in 1999. Shortly after President Clinton authorized the direct flights from cities other than Miami to cities in Cuba other than Havana. Before this policy change, only flights from Miami, Havana were authorized. One of our company's goals at that time, and really still is, to establish a cultural and economic bridge between California and Cuba, while also providing an efficient, cost-effective solution for Cuban Americans to visit their families. That's kind of the principles of our company. In 2000, we operated the first nonstop flight from Los Angeles to Havana in more than 40 years. This service continued on a weekly basis up until July 2004, when President Bush changed the travel restrictions. In 2001, we operated the first nonstop flight between Miami and Cienfuegos, Cuba. And in 2011, the first nonstop flight between San Juan, Puerto Rico and Santiago de Cuba. Earlier this month also, we did kind of an ad hoc flight, the first flight operated by United Airlines between Houston and Havana. So you can see a lot of growth and a lot of interest in expanding routes. Today, CTS operates about 10 flights per week on average between Miami and Cuba, and we operate now the weekly flight from Los Angeles International to Havana, departing on Tuesdays. As some of you know, we've also been working closely with Congresswoman Lee's office and also with Darius's help to help kind of launch this effort to do this flight from Oakland. It's had a lot of challenges. There's tremendous interest here in the Bay Area to do this flight, which we know. There's a lot of challenges as well, especially now that when you don't have the Cuban American population that they have in Miami, it's challenging, especially now that there's been kind of a slowdown, if you will, or almost an elimination of license renewals. But our business really depends on all licensed travelers, but especially those groups, especially from the West Coast. I think right now our flight from our flight from Los Angeles to Havana is the only nonstop flight on the West Coast of the Caribbean.
Right.
Because as most of you guys know, live in California, people travel to Mexico or to Hawaii and other places. But so I think right now we have the only nonstop flight besides a seasonal flight to Puerto Rico. How many people, just to do a quick survey, similar to the one Kirby did earlier, assuming most of you have traveled to Cuba since 2000, how many people that are from the Bay Area traveled from Mexico? See, this is my problem.
Gotta change.
But I understand why.
Gotta change that.
How many travel from Miami Miami charter flights? Peter, I know you only fly LA, right? And how many have tried the Los Angeles flight, the flight from Los Angeles? Great. I know everyone on the panel has done it before.
Yeah.
So I encourage you guys really to try it. For those of you living in the Bay Area, you can depart here at 7 a.m. in the morning. You can connect to our flight at 11. You can be in Havana by 3 p.m. or 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So it's really the quickest way for you to get to Havana from here. That's really all I have to say. I'll be around if you guys need more information. I did want to recognize someone in the crowd, a friend that really, he should be here somewhere on the panel, is Sal Landau. And Sal, all that you've done, for relationships with Cuba, and really, if you guys want to know anything about Cuba, he's really a person. Thank you.
Our last presenter is Darius Anderson, who's the founder and CEO of Platinum Advisors, and of course, one of the sponsors of the conference.
Thank you. I apologize for being a little late. I got stuck in traffic coming down from Sacramento. I want to start by thanking a few people. This is not only a personal passion, but a vision. And I want to thank Mark and Jack from IGS for helping put this together, and the other folks from Berkeley that stepped in to go ahead and put the conference together. And I'll tell you, I enjoyed the planning process. My great friend Julia came out, who means a lot to me and has been a great mentor to me in my love and passion for Cuba. I, like many of you, started my passion and vision for Cuba illegally in the 80s. It's all right, I can say it now. It's statute of limitations is run. I went through Toronto when I was in college because many folks were going to Fort Lauderdale, and I just found it at the time when I was going to GW that it'd be very boring, and found Cuba to be a lot more interesting, and fell in love with the island in 1986. And people found out about my passion for Cuba, and one day I got a call from Michael that said the then head of the intersection was in town, and at the time I was the finance director for Governor Gray Davis, and Michael said, hey, the head of the intersection's in town, he'd love to come meet you. We met. And I helped put together the first resolution by a major legislature that encouraged the U.S. Congress to lift the trade embargo. California was the first to get through both the Assembly, the Senate, and we got a signature by the governor at the time, and it was a big deal. And
Darius, can I say something really quick? Sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
My apologies.
No.
But on that point, I think it's important to know, important fact, that before we met Darius that time, we actually had a meeting with the Speaker of the House, asking him to get his support on passing this resolution in the state of California. He was unable to do it. About an hour later, I went to Darius's office, and he looked at it 10 minutes and said, no problem, we'll get right on it. And I think within 30 days, that resolution was passed. So, I mean, really, Darius, that's the truth.
And part of this is, and I know other people have mentioned this, is for those that have been there and those that have not, that Cuba evokes passion. Passion on all levels. Passion for artists, passions for music, passions for history. And we can't let the barriers that either governments put up go ahead and restrict the exchange of ideas and the exchange of arts and the exchange of discussions. And we as travelers and we as academics and we as general business folks have to continue to push the envelope. Since Michael started in 2000, we just had our 10th anniversary. We brought down over 800 people. I've operated both a people-to-people license and a humanitarian license. And I will continue to fight every single time I can to go ahead and bring more people to the island. Because it doesn't matter if they're Democrat, Republican, Green, they're educated when they get down there. They learn more about the realities of what's going on in the ground with Cuban people, Cuban government, whatever else it is. And it's very important for us because I do not believe if we are going to get major changes, the changes have to occur on a one-on-one basis. It has to occur with members of the House, members of the Senate, members of the administration, hearing from people that are friends of theirs, people that have gone there. I had the good fortune of bringing Michael Mondavi, and Michael is a very, very Republican member, and he is a member of all of the elite Republican clubs of which I am not a member. And after he came back, he said, you know what, Darius, I was absolutely amazed at what the reality. So many people had told me and had manipulated the facts and had given me misinformation. And he's now fallen in love with the island. He's been down with me twice. And what I'm trying to do is not only do the exchanges that direction, but I've really been pushing hard to bring more Cubans here. I just had a gentleman by the name of Fernando Fernandez, who is one of the great blenders and tasters that blends Cuban cigars and Cuban rum, two of my favorite things. And I hosted an event in the Napa Valley with a group of vintners to show off his palate and how amazing his sense, and he talked all about the rich aroma and history and how a cigar is not just a cigar, no pun intended, but that it is in 4 different stages with regard to flavors. And all of these vintners that walked out of that afternoon and dinner that night became Cubophiles. They've all now followed up with me. They all want to go. They want to experience it. They want to go ahead and be a part of this amazing island. So I think it'd be great to open up for questions. I want to thank everybody for being here. It's something that I will never give up on, and I'm going to continue to go ahead and do whatever I can to make a difference on the ground. And I do want to thank Michael, because if it weren't for Michael and CTS, none of this would have been possible, because in the early days, he helped me arrange a license. He does all the travel. His staff is amazing. I don't know if Todd is here. They do a fabulous, fabulous job. So thank you.
As before, we're passing our little cards, and you can write all the questions you want in them, and then we'll read them off so we can move a little quicker. Oh, yeah. Okay, the first one is for Bill Martinez. When Silvio Rodriguez was denied a visa to come to the U.S. and perform at Pete Seeger's 90th birthday, were you surprised that this was not discussed in the media?
No.
Sorry.
I mean, yeah, yes and no. It was a heartbreaker that he wasn't, one of the reasons we finally did succeed in getting Silvio Rodriguez's visa was because, they felt, we missed it by this much. He didn't get the clearance in time, but like a month or so later, we were able to develop a stronger, another tour for him. So we were disappointed, but no, I'm not surprised that we don't get the media play. And I was speaking with folks earlier, we get more excited, we get more media attention if a referee makes a bad call in the end zone. Or if Ozzie Guillen says one positive thing about Fidel Castro, it's in the news for like 3 weeks. And do we hear about it? Visas getting denied for Silvio? No. Did we hear about the reality in Cuba like that? No. We hear anything positive about Cuba like that? No. So no, I'm not.
Okay. Thank you. Let's see. I think this question is for Michael. When do you anticipate the Oakland flights will start? Have you ever considered student discounts for the nearly 200 low-income students from the U.S., many from California, currently studying medicine on a full scholarship in Cuba? So it's Oakland, and have you considered
You can almost answer that question. Well, the flights, like I mentioned earlier, the flights from Oakland are challenging. I'm originally from the Bay Area. I'm from Pleasanton originally. So, it's my passion to get something done from the Bay Area. But for the reasons I mentioned, it's difficult. I'm hopeful, and we looked at it possibly in December or possibly a time during the summer we can do it. In terms of student discounts, it's a good idea. I think it's something that's kind of in the spirit of our company to promote these interchanges of people and students in particular. But yeah, if there's a group or individual students, feel free to contact me and we'll do something special for them.
And let me just say, because I've been working with Congressman Barbara Lee, the Congressman is doing an amazing job on the Oakland flight, and she and I met yesterday, actually, to talk about it in advance of the conference. And part of it is, as Michael knows, it's, when you start off a new route, one of the return trip is really a dead trip, unless you have the plane sit there the whole time. And so what we're looking at now is potential sponsorship, somebody to go ahead and fill that return trip to be able to start something from the Bay Area. And so Barbara and I have been working on targeting individual companies or high net worth individuals that may have a passion or love for the island to help us fill that gap. And we talked about it yesterday and came up with a whole target list of folks that I'll be following up with.
Okay. The next question is, where can you get great Cuban cigars and rum?
Your house?
You opened that one up.
In Cuba.
I guess in Cuba. Do you have any?
In Cuba. You can't bring them here.
Okay.
under the embargo right now.
But let me say
Sure,
this,
sure.
because I hope, the current administration, or however the election ends up, will go back to the Clinton days, because during the Clinton days, all of us could go ahead and bring back Cuban-made product. And Cuban-made product is coffee, rum, and cigars. And, in those purchases, it helps the Cuban government. It was cut out, and that aspect has not been reinstated.
Right.
And it's something that when I talk to people, I'm always pushing for. If Cubans can come here when they visit me and buy wine and bring wine back and put it underneath the plane, then why shouldn't I, in a democracy, be able to go ahead and buy rum there and bring it back the same way they do when they come and visit and spend money in my country? So that's one of the things I hope that many of us will continue to push, because I think it's those little things that again change the larger picture.
Well, going back to Clinton days is not a new paradigm. I'd vote for much more than that.
Yeah,
It's more
Yeah.
than cigars and
Yeah.
rum.
yeah, no, I agree.
I'm representing the National Association of Black Social Workers. We hope to travel to Cuba in 2013. How difficult will it be to get a group of 60 to 100 people to partake in an educational experience? Who shall I contact to help with securing a license and visas?
Well, I currently have a license now, and, I'm not sure, and Michael knows better, but, many licenses have been turned down. We're pushing, and, I'm using whatever influence to have people write letters on my behalf, because I brought, everybody from Congress people to, mayors of major cities in the United States, and a lot of different folks. And we've run tours as small as, 4 people up to 107 people. So it is doable, and I'll tell you that Michael, has everything wired on the ground to be able to do everything that's scalable. So you can do that small intimate trip of 4 up to 100 plus. But I will tell you, somebody that did 100 plus in Cuba, very, very difficult to do. I think there was an earlier reference about infrastructure and the things that we take for granted. I have many of my staff here, Holly, Melinda, and Callie, to deal with what I refer to as Cuban time and Cuban process. I send them down 2 to 3 days in advance to go ahead and make sure that the schedules that are announced and all the things that we planned on are really there. Because oftentimes things change last minute, but I do think the licenses are available, and hopefully, it doesn't matter the size of the group, it'll be
The
available.
licenses, unfortunately, they're not as available as they used to be right now. We spoke earlier. The reality of OFAC right now is that some licenses are getting approved, but the vast majority of them are not. They're being denied by delay. That is to say, we've had projects pending since March, April, with all the heavy hitters behind us. And as recently as yesterday, Jeff Browner, I know about this one. And Jeff Browner, the licensing chief, I haven't gotten around to that one yet. This was for one artist, and I'm using this one example, super straight up no-brainer activity, and he can't get around to it yet for an activity she was supposed to do in August. And there are a lot of organizations. Look at Harvard and Stanford and PBS and National Geographic, Insight. All of those are either delayed or denied. So the reality is,
Same thing true for students?
The answer is, with universities, you don't have to apply for a license because universities already have them. Let me give you an unfortunate example to corroborate that. With respect to MBA students or undergrads, we like to do a lot of co-curricular trips. I'm taking a group to Panama. It's not for credit, and so the students just sign up and we go and we learn. In order to go to Cuba, you got to pay for credit. USC, a unit of credit is like $1,500. So that's on top of the cost to go. So you could take a unit. So I wrote a letter through our legal counsel, I should have done it myself, through the legal counsel, asking for permission for a special license to take a group of MBA students to do a study tour, not for credit. And because I used the terms, we'd like to do company visits, we'd like to have meetings with corporate executives, and we'd like to meet with people from the government ministry for briefings. And I didn't use the words co-sponsored, sponsored, seminars, workshops. We got shut down, simply because I used the wrong language. Well, that's the excuse in the writing, that they were looking for a reason to shut us down. So start early, be persistent, be willing to wait.
Be prepared for not getting it, bottom line. I have a dance group that's supposed to be there in about 2 weeks, and Jeff got to me and says, oh yeah, too much free time on that first day there. They arrive at 7 at night. He wanted them to do workshops at 7 at night when they get there. They were only going to be there for 5 days. So, yeah, no, OFAC's not a pretty picture right now.
Wait, hold on. Go ahead. Saul, go ahead.
Don't social workers qualify under general license?
Social workers?
Okay, if you read the general license, there are certain categories of professionals that you don't need a license to travel to Cuba, but you have to be willing and able, and I should let Kirby answer this because he knows this, but I learned it from him, but having read it, you have to be able to explain why you were there and how it met with your profession. And so if you cannot show a schedule of full-time activity, your point, you could be in trouble, all right? You know, some religious groups have gotten into trouble because people have gone to the beach on the weekends. Exactly, if you're going there as a religious trip and you're not in services on the weekend, then there's a question. So again, you can travel. The issue is on you. You can travel. When you come back, they'll question you. You need to be able to justify why you were there, okay?
We have actually done it with agricultural groups. We work a lot with, for example, we did one with the Napa Valley Vintners and put together a whole series of meetings because food is evolving in Cuba and the paladars are becoming much more advanced, and you're finding that there's more of an appetite. Right now it's basically, you know, New Zealand, Australian, and European wines. And there's very few California wines, and so we've brought down trips for the sole purpose of selling and educating, and that met the obligation.
Okay, there are,
What, Kirby?
Kirby, you better get in here.
I'm sorry.
That, in a sense, that's totally different, because there are certain categories, if you work for a food company,
Right.
you work for a company that's involved in any aspect of agricultural business, drinking it, distributing it, exporting it, shipping it, storing it, growing it, you are under a general license, which means you don't have to inform OFAC, ask OFAC, anything else, you can go to Cuba. If for agricultural purposes, people to people, 180 degrees different.
Okay, there are 4 Bay Area cities with Cuban sister cities. 1,000 of Bay Area residents have gone. I'm supposed to ask for a show of hands of how many people here will go via Oakland if you had a chance. There you go.
You filled one plane.
And so, when will you start? When will the flight start? This one is for Darius. Are you currently traveling under a P2P or another license?
People to people.
Yeah, I'm traveling on a people to people. Yeah.
Always, I describe my trips in 91 and 93 as, quote, life-changing experiences. In 5 years, as the result of the quote-unquote transition, will that description still apply?
Will it be life-changing? Is that the question?
I guess so, yeah.
I mean, listen, I always think Cuba will be life-changing because the attitude of the people, the culture, the architecture, everything is amazing. I think the Cubans eventually, short-term, long-term, are going to go through the same problems that we do in every major city of urban planning. You know, I live in the small town or village of Sonoma, and our city council voted down Pete's Coffee coming to town this week. It was a tragic. I had nothing to do with it, but I think that, you know, that's one of the fears from an urban planning standpoint. Will it have the same charm? Will it have the same chemistry? Will it not be commercialized to the point of, you know, turning many of us off that go there for all the reasons that we go there? And so I think that they're, you know, on a short term. I remember there was probably 5-6 years ago, Michael and we did a trip, and I hadn't been in 6 months, and I walked into the Plaza de San Francisco, and there was a Benetton. And I was very disappointed to see the Benetton because, you know, the brand sort of corrupted, you know, one of the great plazas. Luckily, the business didn't work, and they went out of business, and so they took down the sign, and now that location is being used for something else. But I do think it will always have its charm, but I think it's going to be about urban planning, long-term. The government there at some point is going to have to sit back. I know they've done some of this, design the country into zones, protect cultural heritage, figure out how they're going to allow, you know, development when Walmart shows up and wants to do a Walmart or Kmart or whatever else. They're going to have to figure out how to master plan the island.
You know, a little bit to that point also is that, you know, the US 5, not the Cuban 5, the US 5 that was mentioned earlier, the last thing they want to see is travel, okay? They will fight and everything for agricultural trade and things like that, but once US citizens travel to Cuba freely, the embargo's over. So it's the last thing they want to see go. So they will let, you know, this happen, this happen, this happen, but when it comes to people traveling freely, it's the last thing that they want to see because it's over after that. So once Americans go over there and see the realities of Cuba, you know, it's done.
I am asked to recognize that licensed travel service providers like Global Exchange send groups like social workers to Cuba on their general licenses. This is for Michael. If the embargo is dropped, will the charter companies suffer? What is your future?
Well, for us, no, it's you know, obviously we've been proponents of lifting the travel restrictions and ending the embargo. A lot of people ask the same question, well, isn't that against your interest? Because as soon as that happens, you know, the airlines are going to come in and it's going to be done for you guys. But for us, you know, we know that we'll eventually turn into more of like a tour operator type of business. And we're really not interested in so much of the air. We're probably working closely with the airlines and with the tour operators within Cuba to do a different type of business. So our business will change with it. So we're not at all concerned about that.
And I will tell you, having traveled, you know, like you guys, you know, with a lot of different people, what makes Michael's company so great is the people that they have on the ground and the relationships they have with certain tour guides and access, and it's not a standard experience. The people that they give you access to really show you a different side of Cuba. It's you just don't go to the Tropicana and the traditional restaurant. They bring you out and introduce you to people that you never would have met, different artists, different locations. And they've done the hard work to build that network, and they're maintaining that network. And from an outsider's view, I think that's the type of thing that will be extremely valuable and very few other people will have. And that's not something that they'll be able to take away from them.
How can Cubans do business with us here? That is, Cuban Educational and Cultural Institute would like to sell Cuban books to institutions in the United States. How can we facilitate that?
It's something that's allowable. Informational material is something that's exempt from the embargo, so it's something that's allowed.
And the informational material is thanks to the Howard Berman and the Berman Act. Howard Berman was replaced by Eleanor Ros-Lehtinen as the head of the Congress's Foreign Affairs Committee. She's the one that wanted to get rid of, she called Clinton and wrote to Clinton when La Comanita dance troupe was here. She said, why are they getting visas? Why are you giving licenses? Why is Vicente Feliu in the United States last week to talk about the Cuban financing? That's the person who's calling you now. She's the new Howard Berman in reverse. And so she's someone and that crowd, that mentality is what we have to deal with.
And the other thing I would tell you, and it's interesting for all of those who've been there, it's one of the few societies where the true wealthiest and the true elites are the artists. Because the individuals that are making the most today are those that are, some of the biggest and brightest names. And, as an art collector, I would tell you, outside of Chinese contemporary, which is probably the hottest, art market in the world right now, that Cubans are a great investment. And there are many people, dealers that go down there and buy art. And the nice thing is that when you meet these Cuban artists and you do buy, is that those dollars actually trickle out into the neighborhoods. Those are the dollars that go to help the mothers, the aunts, the uncles. They reform, literally whole communities. So I tell people that that's one of those great investments when you're there. It's legal to go ahead and bring it back. Make it an investment in Cuban art. One, I think it may have long-term value, and two, it really changes people's lives.
Given the name of this conference, can anyone explain if there should be a special or something special about the relationship between Cuba and California?
Well, again, I think Kirby's done a lot of great work, on this, and we are the greatest exporter, in my opinion, in the world of agricultural products. And I think that as Cuba continues to emerge as a major powerhouse with regard to tourism, that our agricultural markets will continue to go ahead and grow and prosper and that type of thing. And I think that that's where you're going to see a lot of, opportunity economically. But then to everything that Bill does, I mean, we're one of the great, cultural, art centers in the world. And especially with what's happening in the visual arts, I believe that, in the next 25 years, you're going to see major call centers, migrations from places in Asia to Cuba. And Cuba's going to become what India is today. Cuba's going to become what the Philippines and many other places are because of how educated the population, many already speak English, and the proximity to our coastline. And so I think that, as they plan, and they've done a transition from sugar to, other things like biotech and pharma that you've already talked about, but I think you're going to see services become a major economic driving force because of the education level, and it'll be so much easier to go ahead and fly to Havana or Santiago or Santa Clara than to go ahead and fly to Mumbai or one of the, other countries.
And I think also the potential link, potential commercial link. I think that Cuba was one of the top markets for California rice producers back before the embargo. That's right. There's a lot of potential commercial activity there once these things can happen. Also, in terms of tourism, if there were free flights and people can travel freely, there's close to 3 million tourists that travel to Cuba from other countries other than the United States. And those tourists can't travel to the U.S. They can't travel to Puerto Rico from Cuba. They can't travel to Puerto Rico. They can't travel to Miami. They can't travel to California. So you have this big, huge population of tourists that travel to Cuba, but they can't fly to the United States. So this is really something that I think could also have a positive impact on tourism within the United States.
Let me add a quick comment there. We actually have the advantage of political distance. When our university decided to go to Cuba, I rented up the flag to the appropriate vice provost, who walked into the president and said, we'd like to send students to Cuba. And his initial reaction was, well, we should take this to the Board of Trustees. There could be some political backlash. And then he said, no, this is a fight I would like to have. But when I talk to colleagues who are closer to Cuba, particularly in Florida and so forth, they couldn't run these programs because of the powerful alums that they have in their schools, which would shut them down. So in a sense, we have a little bit more freedom to do things here, to engage. And the Cubans desperately need our engagement. Their students, their professors, they need the engagement with us. The dialogue, the discussion, setting aside the political issues, just the basic, from the point of view of business, just the basic questions. You put a group of MBA students in front of Cuban business people and they start asking questions, and the Cubans they're learning from the questions. Our students are learning from the answers, but the Cubans are learning about what it takes to compete in a global economy. So again, we have it's a slightly different answer to the question, but we have a lot to add because of our political distance.
We are struggling against the clock, so that was the last question we can take for now. Please stay in your seats because we're going to move into the next segment of the conference right away. I want to thank the panel very much for your participation.